Appeals for the City of Troy, Michigan, to order. And before we proceed with our roll call, I'm just going to, for the purpose of everyone who is visiting from the public or watching at home, introduce the people who will be participating in the meeting up here. And so over here, to your right, my left, is Ms. Kupa, and she is a zoning Board of Appeals member, but she also is a planning commissioner, so she's our liaison between those two boards, which are both appointed by City Council. And then over here is Mr. Lambert. This is Mr. Kalsunas. Mr. Kalsunas is an alternate to this board, appointed by Troy City Council, and he is going to be acting as a full voting member here tonight because he's sitting here representing himself, but another member who couldn't be here tonight. I'm Glenn Clark. I am your chairman. And over here is Mr. Desmond, and this is Mr. McCauley. And we are a board of 7. So when we get to your variance request, if you do have business before us here tonight, I'm going to ask if you would like a postponement to the next meeting for consideration by this a full voting member or members of the board. Since we are 7, we have one person who's not here, and you do have the right to request postponement to a board of 7, but it's never a guarantee that we're ever going to have 7 at any given meeting. And it's not the board's, it's not your right to have that postponed. If the board majority agrees with that, then we would move it to a future agenda. But that's something we'll get to a little bit later. And over here on the side is Mr. Evans, who is he represents the city administration and services this board in a support function. And on the very end is Mr. Motsney, who during the day is an assistant city attorney for the city of Troy, and he will serve tonight as our legal advisor. And I do want to just introduce somebody who's not here tonight, because we should be celebrating the fact that he is at home doing daddy duty. Our vice chairman, Mr. Agawas, Dan Agawas, and wife had a baby 2 days ago, and so he is busy with the new bundle of joy, so we're very excited for him, and we give him the night off. And so without any further ado, we are going to ask Mr. Evans to call the roll.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Kalsunas.
Here.
Mr. Desmond.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. Kupa.
Here.
Okay, we have quorum, and actually now we have 7 seated members of this board that will be conducting business tonight. At this point in time, I'm going to ask Mr. Lambert to read our rules and procedures for better understanding for anyone who is visiting us here tonight. Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The procedure is the board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chair, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with their name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, for example, a next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc., and then state whether they are in favor of or against the variance request and give their reasons for the opinion. Comments must be directed directly through the chair. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to the Oakland County Circuit Court.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. So at this point, we're going to move on to item number 3, which is related to the minutes from our 2 meetings in July 17th and July 31st, 2018. Is there a member of the board who would like to question or make a comment or express a concern about what was presented to you in your packet? Seeing none, we will, Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of both the July 17th and July 31st minutes.
It's moving. Is there a second for approving both sets of minutes? Ms. Koopa seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunas.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes, motion carries. And we move on to item number 4, which is related to our agenda that was presented to us in our packet. Are there any concerns by a member of the board about the agenda or any suggestions for changing said agenda? And we all, I think, saw the email about, I think from Mr. Evans regarding the agenda items, so we're familiar with what's presented in front of us on our computers and on the handouts in the vestibule, that this is the actual order that we need to have them in for tonight's meeting. Okay, so this will be set as far as the agenda for tonight's meeting, and we move right on to hearing of cases. Mr. Evans, could you please present to us related to 1681 Oak Forest Drive?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property is located in a neighborhood which is south of Square Lake and west of John R. Road, and the overheads at the front of the building. I've got an aerial, front of the room, I'm sorry. I've got an aerial of the neighborhood. The area of the property is circled in red here and outlined in yellow. There's a close-up of the property outlined in yellow. The property is on the north side of Oak Forest, just a few lots east of, I believe that's, well, I can't read that name, whatever that is. Ashwood. Thank you. And there's a close-up of the subject property and a few of the properties in the area. Now, what the applicant's proposing to do is add on to the first floor of the back of the house, and this is an actual picture of the back of the house. And they wanted to make it look something like that. That's not the house, but something indicative of what they'd like to do. And they provided some elevations to show the board how that will look. Now, this is the site plan, and Oak Forest is on the bottom here. And I've circled the addition that's outlined here in dark color. Now, any additions to the home need to be set back at least 40 feet from this back property line, which is at the top of the drawing. And the addition as proposed will be set back 30 feet from the rear property line. So in order to proceed with this project, he is seeking a variance from the board for relief from the rear yard setback requirement. I'll turn it over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there a member of the board who would like to inquire of staff? Seeing that there isn't, we're going to call the applicant forward. So if you're here related to item 5A, please step forward and identify yourself and mention at the microphone what your relationship to the property in question is. Good evening.
My name is Srinivas, last name A-N-N-E. I'm actually a property owner. So we are actually requesting to have the setback adjusted to 30 feet instead of 40 feet. The reason we explained very well in the document that I've provided. Along with this, personally what I would like to say is that my rear property doesn't have any trees or anything, whereas most of the subdivisions you would see the properties at least, so you can have personal time sitting back, privacy I would say. Since this particular subdivision is just a houses back to back, backyards, and along with that I also have a medical condition for the winter time. I have an asthma allergy that if I don't get any sun during the winter time, so I get problems with those. So that's why we are requesting to see if I can have the sunroom built on my property.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions for this petitioner? Mr. Lambert.
Yes, sir. Did you talk to any of your neighbors to see what their opinions were on?
Yeah, I've talked to both the neighbors. They're happy with it. They have no issues. And one of the neighbor is actually out of the country, and he said he would send an email to the city. I don't know if they send it or you could have received it or not. And I am also one of the homeowners association director that recently got elected, which I submitted the paper along with this packet. Yeah, and I have another neighbor who is actually here too. So,
Just as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, we have a letter from the president of the association objecting to the variance because they say it's I guess it's not in compliance with the Architectural Control Committee provisions. Are you aware of that letter?
yeah, I did spoke to her, and she said, I just wanted to make sure that everybody maintains the harmony or something, but then it is up to the council members to make a decision. But she's not a homeowners association member anymore, and they've actually sold all the houses and they're done building the houses in that particular subdivision. My main concern is that, especially if I wanted to use my backyard during the summertime where it gets so hot and I can't sit down, and in winter time I have the health condition that I really appreciate if you guys consider this.
Thank you.
Anyone else for this petitioner? If you could have a seat, please.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. McCauley.
How long have you lived in this home?
We just built 1 year, this is a brand new subdivision, and before we used to live in the heartland, right behind the Baker Middle School.
So you've been here 1 year,
Yeah, 11 months.
11 months? Okay.
Yeah, we are waiting to get this, the landscaping done so we can get this finished.
Okay, if you could have a seat, please.
Thank you.
So at this point in time, we're going to open up the public hearing on this matter. And if you would like to address the board on this issue, please step to the microphone. Please step to the microphone. And please identify yourself and mention how perhaps you're related to the property, neighborhood.
Yep. Hello, my name is Nick Bookman. My property directly backs up to theirs. Actually, yes, in the circle there that Paul is indicating, that's my property here, which actually happens to be on the agenda later this evening as well. And I am in support of the proposed sunroom. Okay?
Thank you. Anyone else would like to address the board on this matter? Please step to the microphone. Anyone else would like to address the board on this matter? Please step to the microphone. Close the public hearing out and ask Mr. Lambert to share with us all communications we received on this matter.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned during my questioning of the petitioner, we only have one communication. That's an email of opposition from the president of the Homeowners Association indicating it's not in compliance with the Architectural Control Committee for the condo, or site condo. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll bring it back to the board table for possible action. Inquiry of staff or discussion?
I have an inquiry for Mr. Evans. How does this lot comply with an R1C zoning? Does it meet the requirements of an R1C zoning?
Yes.
Okay. So then as I look at this, then I would say that there's no, there's no, how would you say it? Basically, I'm not seeing where the, where we're running into any kind of problems with it then, as far as, I'm at a loss for words.
Regularity?
Yes, yeah, irregularity. I'm not looking at anything that would cause us to look at this and say that we should grant this because there's an issue with the lot or anything like that.
Is there another member who would like to be recognized? Mr. Eisenbacher.
The petitioner did submit a detailed list on page 16 of our packet detailing their interpretation of the hardship, and The hardship is basically that the lot is small relative to the house itself. So, like you mentioned, it was R1C, and it looks like based on the schematic diagram provided, the survey, it appears that the house and the garage take up all the limits of a typical R1C site plan, with the front yard, the side yards, and the backyard. And there's no real tolerance for any sort of add-on to the house unless it's in the small square in the front that wasn't built on between the house and the garage. So there's no practical way that they can put any structure in the backyard with the way that the house was sited. So that's somewhat of a difficult item, because the builder is the prior owner of the house, and one of our items is that it can't be the current owner or the previous owner that caused this issue.
I would say I think your interpretation is correct, but I would probably disagree with your first comment, which is, yeah, the house, the size that the builder built is such a size that you can't add on another room. So just because, I mean, we've never looked at things on this board that every homeowner in the city of Troy has the opportunity and the right to add on any room of their choice at any time for any purpose, you know, or any business for that matter, to be able to add on a wing or an extra manufacturing, you know, building. So that's my difficulty with this. I mean, I understand that they actually wrote this practical difficulty explanation. I don't see it. And I would just like to point out, and I don't think that this board should get into a he said, she said scenario, but the petitioner said that this woman who emailed us, Ms. Sobey, isn't even a member of the homeowners association anymore, but she clearly signs it that she's the president of the homeowners association. So how can you not be a member of the homeowners association and be the president of the homeowners association? That doesn't ring true, doesn't smell right in my nostrils for someone to come in here and challenge that. Doesn't mean this person isn't stating something that isn't correct. It's just we have to factor in all things. And as I mentioned before, anyone can come to the microphone and say anything, and there's really no recourse for someone to say something that if it's not true. So I just kind of want to put that out for everyone to think about for a minute. Is there another member who would like to be recognized? Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, there are a couple of things that, to me, suggest that we may want to postpone this. And those being, number one, the gentleman who came in front of us said that he's on the Homeowners Association board, and so it might be worthwhile to clarify exactly what the position of that board is by the next meeting. Secondly, the gentleman that came up to support his petition also is item C on tonight's agenda, and we have no objection from the Homeowners Association to his variance request. So obviously there's something we need to clarify here before we can make a decision. And the third thing, kind of as a follow-up to what you indicated, sometimes when there's a new subdivision being created, the actual developer will take some of the positions on that homeowners association board. So Ms. Sobey may be somehow an employee of the developer, and she may still have a role on that board, or if all the units have been sold, she may no longer have that. So it'd be worthwhile to clarify that before we take action on this item tonight. That was my feelings.
I think those are some good comments. Ms. Koopa.
I would like to add to Mr. Lambert, because this email from Ms. Sobey was received on July 11th, or dated July 11th, which is a considerable period. So I'd like a more current communication. Something may have happened in the last 6 weeks that she is no longer the president of the association.
So let me just inquire of Mr. Evans. So if I'm understanding what Ms. Koopa is saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're asking for a outbound communication perhaps from the city or from the board to this person, but the board's never done that before, since I've been on the board, which is quite a few years, as far as, the board actually sending some communication outbound. Mr. Evans, is that something that the city administration would do?
No, the relationship of the board to the residents, those are all controlled by private documents that control that, and the city has no role or authority in that.
So I guess if that was a member's interest, they could, on their own, communicate with her by email. We have her email address, and there's a phone number here too. So that would be someone, if they were so moved, could choose to do that and then report back to us. Mr. Eisenbacher.
I mean, the thing that the city does is the city sends out official notices on postcard to all the nearby homeowners. If there's a concern, they should be contacting their homeowners association or emailing it. I did look up on Garrett Homes, which is the Oak Forest developer, and on their website it says it's sold out. And I did note that the Ann Sobey, her real estate, or not real estate, her email address domain is Ladd's Real Estate, which I believe was the associated with the developer.
Yeah.
Yes. So there is a tie-in there. So I mean, if we want further information from the homeowners association, I think that the chair's comment about needing to make a personal contact would be appropriate, but we also have instructions from our attorney that communication is supposed to take place at these meetings.
Yeah, no, it's, if this is the direction the board wants to go in, the applicant's not precluded as being somebody with some interest in the neighborhood to contacting the association. Perhaps he's aware of meetings or some action that's occurred since that email came out, that there's been an election, there's been a turnover, maybe there's some documents that have been filed with someone other than the city that may be able to demonstrate to this board the interest or non-interest that email writer may or may not have. So those are some options that the applicant could certainly take, a little research on that by them. And they could bring that up. They could turn that in before the next board meeting, and if they turn it in enough time, we can actually include it in the agenda packet.
I'm sorry, you're out of order, sir. Mr. Eisenbacher.
I'd like to ask a question of the applicant.
Sure.
I'd like to invite him up to the microphone.
Mr. Eisenbacher would like to recall the applicant to the microphone.
Actually, I did submit, sorry, go ahead.
If I could ask you the question first. Do you know when your next homeowners association meeting is?
We just recently elected, the election is just got over about a month and a half ago, and I am one of the elected director in those, thing. We're planning to actually have the meeting scheduled sometime next week with 3 of the directors, and I submitted that letter. You should have that letter saying with my name is one of the director that we got recently elected. The packet should have, we should have sent an email with my, the construction guys that actually doing this.
If I could clarify with the applicant, Mr. Chair? Was this with the revised statement of practical
Yes.
difficulty?
Yes.
Yes, your contractor who's assisting with this told us not to use that. Because that statement of practical difficulty actually also talked about the variance being different.
No, I'm talking about the homeowners association elections result. There is a document that I sent it to them, and that should have been part of the revised submissions.
I'll double check our file for you.
Is
I'll do that right now.
Yeah, that letter clearly says that there are 3 people got elected as a new members of the association, and I am personally is one of them. And I have that letter. I should have bought it, yeah.
My second question is, do you still have an architectural control committee with your?
No.
Okay.
So I don't know what that comes under that homeowners association, to be honest.
It should be somewhere detailed in your bylaws what your committees are for the association. And it's probably a 50-page document, as is typical for new homeowners associations.
I didn't look at it, sorry.
Okay, I would tend to agree with Mr. Lambert about delaying this item to the next meeting to get feedback, official feedback, not just from one member of the board, but some official feedback from the homeowners association and from any of your neighbors beyond the one that is also on the agenda this evening.
So would you like to get an emails or letters or signed by them, or what are you guys looking for?
It's your choice, negative impact on your neighborhood.
No problem. I can do that. I mean, I can provide that within no time, since I don't know when is your next zoning meeting. So I was just wondering maybe if I can go ahead and send that information within 2 days. Is there any possibility you can have?
Our next meeting is a month from now.
1 month from today.
Right, so.
It's like the clock ticking. It's
Yeah.
same Tuesday of the month.
Every month.
It just rotates month by month. So if you have the ability to send that in 2 days, why wait? Get it over to Mr. Evans, and he'll be happy to receive it.
Okay, so my question is that I can go ahead and send that information, whatever that you guys are looking for, but still do I have to come back again, or based on that information you guys can review it and give your decision? That's what my question, because this has been already delayed for 3 months, and the winter is coming up, so that I'm just wondering.
If it's going to be postponed, it's going to be postponed to a month from tonight.
Okay.
There is no decisions in between meetings. This is a public body, and we can only render any decision by a majority vote at this body. So it isn't like, okay, well, let's just get together and have coffee in a couple of days and make a friendly decision. It doesn't work that way.
Understand. Okay. All right, so I will go ahead and submit the information from the homeowners association and the letters from the neighbors.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. We're not asking for something specific. Part of if you look at that list of items, it's important that your project not have a negative impact on the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And we've got an official document saying it's going to have a negative impact on your neighborhood. So please provide something from your neighbors and your association saying it's not going to have a negative impact on your neighborhood.
Okay, makes
Okay.
more sense. All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else with the petitioner? Okay, thank you.
I've got a question.
Mr. McCauley?
If we're looking at a potential postponement for this, then we're saying that this has practical difficulty that we see, but we want to make sure that we get all the information to potentially do it. If I look at this petition right now, the way it stands, my question is there practical difficulty? If there isn't, then I don't know what other information would help us, because if it doesn't show practical difficulty, the rest of it doesn't matter. So from that standpoint, if we're looking at postponement, we're postponing because we feel there might be a practical difficulty. I don't think we should postpone it if we don't believe there is a practical difficulty.
I would say that you're accurate if that is your perspective. Mm-hmm. Secondly, well, to just stay on that line of thought for just a second, you have that right in the perspective to believe that. We don't know, because we haven't had a vote yet, what your colleagues and I feel on that matter. But lastly, there is no motion on the table yet. So if you wanted to see this rejected, you could simply make a motion, and then if it's seconded, we're going to be discussing that and then voting on it. If somebody else wants to get out of the gate, a motion for postpone, and you're opposed to, if you want to dispense with or to dispel with the matter tonight, then you would vote no, hoping that it would come back to the board table for either a vote of rejection or no action at all, which still would kill it as well. So there's a couple different ways to skin the cat, so to speak.
I wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree. I mean, I honestly, regardless of whether the homeowners association agrees with it or not, I mean, I see a collection of lots that are all the same size. They're built to the max capacity of that lot as per our zoning, I mean, I don't really see any way to make this, I don't see a practical difficulty. I see a built lot that's maxed out that he wants more space put onto, but I don't really see a difficulty in that. I just see a want, and that's not what we're supposed to go on. So I don't know. I couldn't imagine anything the homeowners association would tell me would change the dimensions of the lot to make it more irregular than it is, because it's not. There's 3 in a row. They're all exactly the same size, and he'd be the one with the sunroom, so it'd be the only non-conforming property. So, I don't know. I don't see one. As much as I want to give it to you, I don't see it.
Also,
Mr. McCauley.
also another point that I want to point out, even though they are separate requests for variances, they are tied together because of proximity. If we look at the 2 on our agenda tonight, if I was to look at that, potentially, if we were to approve one, then they would be they'd be within 75 feet of the other one. If we approved them both, they'd be like 62 feet away from each other, the closest distance. That's from your seat to the door away. That's how close the residence building would be to each other. So I think that's why I look at this, even though they're separate, they do affect each other. So that's something that we need to take into consideration when we look at these.
Thank you. When I saw this agenda, the thing that came to mind, I kid you not, is, wow, this is a sign of our recovered economy. There's dollars in in consumers' hands. They're investing it, they're wanting to invest it in their own property, and that helps business and so forth, but we can't consider what a variance approval for a request to build something like this would do to local contractors, the local economy. The renderings on the room itself looked absolutely beautiful, and I would love to have a 3-season room on the back of my house too, something as magnificent as that. But we do have to look at why we're here, and that is looking for problems that run with the land. And that's called a practical difficulty if you buy a parcel that's irregular shaped, or God created it in such a way that the runoff is this, or the cliff that you can't build on, is that. But when you just have a parcel, as Mr. Desmond said, that someone built a house that's so big, and then you have to have a variance request to build on the dream project, that's a problem from my perspective, and I think from several other members' perspective. We still don't have any resolution in front of us. Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to postpone action on this till our next meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded for postponement to the September
18th.
2018 meeting. Is there discussion on the motion? So I believe we're almost prepared for a vote. So a yes vote would postpone this to September. A no vote would open up for any possible action at that point. Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunas.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
No.
Mr. McCauley.
No.
Motion passes for postponement to September's agenda. And I don't know that we answered the petitioner's request. Just because this board has chosen to take action potentially in a month from now does not mean that the petitioner has to be here. It's not a requirement, but I think you heard from at least one member what he was looking for. So that could be done in absentia, through electronic means to the office, or clearly you would have the right to be here to potentially answer any questions that the board might have. So we move on to item number 5B, related to 4044 Middlebury Drive. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the monitors in the front of the room. And this property is located in a residential neighborhood north of Waddles and east of John R. Once again, it's circled in red and outlined in yellow on the overhead. And this property is at the corner of Middlebury and Greensboro, outlined in yellow. The subject property, everything you see in this overhead is single-family residential identical zoning And the subject matter involves a pool that was erected without a permit in the rear yard, and I've circled the approximate location of the pool to give everybody some perspective. This is the site plan that was provided with the application, and the pool's this circular here. We've got the rear lot line here, and this is a detached shed to the north of the pool. Now, in order to maintain the pool, the ordinance requires two things. A, that the pool be set back at least 6 feet from the back property line, and as it's placed right now, it's only 2 feet. The second thing is that the pool needs to be at least 5 feet from that detached garage. Right now, it's 4 feet 4 inches. And these are some photos provided by the applicant to show the layout of the pool relative to other features of the property. So in order to keep that pool there, the applicant's seeking relief from those two parts of the code. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Mr. Evans, so would the code require the pool to be away from any structure or a particular type of structure, namely, like that you said that this is a metal structure?
Right, this is there's the picture of it there. It's a detached shed-like garage accessory structure.
Any structure or a metal structure as far as the setback?
5 feet away from the accessory structure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's because I don't need a class on why that is, but
Actually, I don't think I know why that is.
I mean, I imagine it could be like something falling off into the pool, or
I could theorize
lightning,
that
or
maybe that, or ingress or egress to the accessory structure. You put it too close, and maybe it becomes a safety issue. But that's only speculation. But that's what the zoning ordinance says.
Okay. Anybody else for our city administration? So we're going to call the petitioner up related to this matter. If you're here for board business on item 5B, please identify yourself and tell us how you are related to the property in question. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Chris Parcell. I'm the owner at 4044 Middlebury Drive. First off, I'd like to say thank you for postponing from last meeting to tonight. I wasn't able to make it to that meeting, so I appreciate that. I am requesting the variance, as Mr. Evans stated, for a 6-foot space from the back, the rear property line, instead of, or 2 feet instead of the 6 foot that's required, and a 4 foot 4 inch instead of the 5 feet that's required from the nearby structure. While the additional 8 inches that's required from the structures could be remedied next year if necessary, the additional 4 foot required from the property line does pose significant practical difficulties. In addressing the city's statement of practical difficulties guidelines, I have the following explanations. For Section A, the slope of the yard and the placement of the patio make it impossible to move the pool without significant work and costs necessary. I would have to excavate and regrade the entire yard. There's a storm sewer in the northeast corner of the lot, and as such, the entire backyard slopes to the drain. Even if that work is completed, I would still need to remove a significant portion of the patio that's shown in one of the pictures there to maintain the state-required 48-inch barrier above ground level that's currently being satisfied by the 54-inch sides of the pool due to the placement and the level position that it's in. Other ordinances such as overhead wires and placement not allowed outside the backyard prevent me from moving the pool anywhere else on the lot. Referring to sections B, C, and D of the difficulty guidelines, the property is my home property. Compliance is not of a personal nature, and the compliance issues are not related. They are related to the original design and construction of the property, not the cost of myself or a previous owner. Referring to Section E, the variances on the pool placement will not impair supply of light or air to the surrounding areas. They do not increase the danger of fire or endanger public safety. They do not diminish established property value, or do they in any way impair the public health, safety, comfort, morals, or welfare of inhabitants. The pool meets all other safety and ordinance requirements as indicated by Troy Inspector Mitchell Gruznick's inspection. Two of my neighbors also saw fit to submit letters submitting those observations. I have spoken to the neighbor that I share the property line with, and I understand that they may have issue with the placement of the pool. However, I would like to point out that the pool is My neighbor mentioned, and I admit it's possible that the first time I drained the pool, it may have caused flooding to their yard. It did cause flooding to mine. I can only say that I've since learned how to drain a pool properly. So I don't believe that future drainings will cause any flooding in either yard. As I mentioned, I meet all safety and ordinance requirements, save for the 2 variances in question here. I've even put in added safety measures that are neither required nor that affect these variances. So I can only reiterate that significant practical difficulties that I face in moving the pool, and the fact that an additional 4 feet away from the property line and 8 inches from the structure does nothing to enhance, diminish, or otherwise change the pool's aspects or effects. That being said, I have and will continue to fully respect my neighbor, all my neighbors and their property, using the pool in a manner so as not to disrupt their well-being.
Is there a member that would like to ask a question of the petitioner? Mr. McCauley.
As I'm looking at the overhead picture on page 36 of your property and the way it's laid out, have you looked at alternative sites on your property to where potentially place that pool? For instance, east of your driveway, south of your patio, by that tree, to the west of the tree?
As I understand it, because it's a corner lot, that's considered front yard property, so I cannot move it out that direction.
Unless you have a variance.
I'm sorry?
Unless you have a variance. We give those out here.
That would be a more difficult one to push.
You mentioned that there was a drain. Where was the storm drain located?
It's in the northeast corner of the property, right behind the corner of the shed that was shown in the picture.
Okay.
So everything slopes toward that drain. My neighbor's yard also slopes in that direction, somewhat in that corner.
How would you drain it differently next time to appease the neighbor that had potential shrub damage?
I would say that I'm draining it properly the way most people drain it now. What I did in the first part, I didn't really realize how to drain it. I've never owned a pool, and I just kind of opened the valve, and, well, that was not smart. So now it's hooked up to a hose system, so, I mean, it just drains how it's supposed to.
To?
It drains to the drain there.
So you run the hose to the drain?
Yes.
Anyone else for this petitioner? Okay, you can have a seat, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you'd like to address the board on this matter, please step to the microphone and identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Gary Harris. I'm at 4051 Greensboro Drive. I'm the property directly behind Mr. Parcells' property who's asking for the variance. I'm opposed to the variance. As you mentioned, it drained in our yard before. We also don't want to deter any potential future owners, being that the pool is only 2 feet away from the property line. Not everybody likes a pool into the backyard. The lot is not irregularly shaped, and the corner lot does have a bunch of space for a pool. So if you could buy a different pool, it would easily fit. This hardship was self-created. He did not look up the rules in terms of how to place a pool. He never came to the board prior to get a permit, and it could have easily been addressed prior to putting up this particular structure, and no harm, no foul. So I asked the board to deny the request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So anyone else who would like to address the board on this matter? Please step forward. Is there another member of the public who would like to address the board on this matter? Please step to the microphone and be recognized. Close out the public hearing and ask Mr. Lambert to share with everyone the communications we received on this matter.
I believe we have 3 email communications. We have 2 in support of the variance request. One is at 4066 Middlebury, and the other is at 4056 Middlebury. And then we have the one opposed, which I believe is the applicant's spouse or a relative at the home there next door adjoining the property.
Thank you. Would a member like to be recognized on this matter?
Mr. Chair, if I could?
Oh, Mr. Evans.
Just a point of clarification from the earlier question. I had misstated the requirement for the distance. I had indicated that the pool needed to be 5 feet from an accessory structure. It actually has to be 5 feet from any building. So I wanted the board to be aware of that before we started discussion.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
On the sketch, you indicated a distance from the patio. Does that apply to the patio also, or just from vertical sort of structures?
Vertical that has a roof, that would be a building. So the patio is not a building.
Okay. So it could be closer to the patio?
Yes, it can.
Okay.
Ms. Koopa.
I have a question for Mr. Evans. When someone builds a pool, do they have to come to the planning department for a permit?
They go to the building department to get permits from the building department, yes.
In the application, it says that the applicant was not informed of the need for a permit because he spoke to city inspectors about the fence and other pool considerations prior to purchasing the pool. Who would have been the one to tell him?
Well, I think the applicant can answer who he spoke to, because in the 10 years that I've been at the city, and I would opine that even years before, pool permits have been required for pools. As a matter of fact, the current code says a pool permit's required for any structure that's capable of holding 24 inches of water or less. So to answer your direct question as to who he spoke to, I couldn't answer that, but maybe the applicant could.
Would you like to recall
Yes, I'd like to recall the applicant.
petitioner could come please back to the microphone. Ms. Koopa has a question.
So prior to purchasing the pool, were you able to, which department did you go to? Who did you ask? And when were you told? Do you remember?
I should clarify, it's a temporary pool structure. So this is the second summer that I had put it back up. So the first summer I had it out, that was when I called, so that was 2017. So it was at the beginning of 2017, and unfortunately I don't recall. I did call and talk to them about fencing and what the requirements were for safety. And at no time was a permit mentioned, but I mean, I understand that ignorance doesn't make it correct, so I don't stand by that as a reason.
Thank you.
I had a question for the petitioner, too.
Mr. McCauley.
So you take this down every year? So it's disassembled every year?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So if I could just ask one quick question.
Sure, sorry.
So if it's a temporary structure, would you classify it as a non-expensive structure compared to
I would
something
not,
else?
in terms of my budget, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? No, okay. We're all set. Thank you very much. So we're back to the board table, and if there's a member who would like to be recognized, please indicate so for possible action. Mr. Desmond.
I do see that based on this is a corner lot, I mean, he is bound by rules that his neighbors are not bound by. He's got a large setback, that whole front area that looks like perfectly usable space when you actually look at how much space that is. Not only don't actually have a line up on there to show where the setback would be, but just, you know, me trying to come up with a gauge, I mean, he doesn't have a lot of use of that front that, you know, that other people might have on their lot. So I do see a hardship in the property. Now, as far as the details of where he could move it around back in the small area he's got, I don't know. I would be open to the idea of granting a variance based on the fact that he does have a non-conforming irregular lot compared to his neighbors. So, I mean, it is what it is.
Okay, thank you. Is there another member who would like to be recognized? Mr. Lambert.
You know, I don't like to be the bad guy, but in this case, normally I wouldn't have a major objection to it, but because the next door neighbor is most directly impacted by it, that close to his fence, I have some real concerns about granting a variance because of the next door neighbor who's most adversely impacted by it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Desmond, were you referring to that southeast corner, potentially really having the ability,
Well, I mean, yeah.
in a perfect world, for the petitioner to put it there?
He would have a considerable amount of additional lot space that he could use to put a pool in if it was not a corner lot that he doesn't have access to his property through. So, I mean, he does lose out in some ways of, where he could put a structure, put a pool, comparison to neighboring properties, but I don't know exactly where those lines sit. You'd have to see where it is. Is that 25 feet there? Is that R1C?
Well, the test is that the pool needs to go in the rear yard. So I've drawn some red lines. There's one here and one here. And these lines are supposed to line up with so on the south side of the house along Greensboro there, if you were to extend imaginarily from the west corner of the house to the east, everything south of that would be considered the front yard. In other words, not the rear yard. So as the chair mentioned earlier, if you did want to move it to that area that you're referring to, a variance would be required.
Okay.
So, Mr. Evans, if we're just, once again, we're just talking, in that southeast corner, the only hurdle that the petitioner would have to, the property owner would have to meet is a 5-foot setback from the corner of the house, correct?
I would opine that, yeah, they, well,
And
they
the
have 5 feet
fence.
5 feet from the rear property line, which is over here, 5 feet from the property line, or 6 feet from the property line, 5 feet from the building.
Right.
Because they're not contemplated in front yards, I don't have a prescribed setbacks for pools in the front yard. The setback is if you put a house up.
Scupa.
So if they moved it closer to the patio and had the required setback from the rear property line, would they need to request would the applicant need to request a variance to move it closer to the patio?
No. If there's room to push it towards the east, they do not
The west, you
need, or the west, yes, they don't need a variance to have that from the patio. No, in theory, they could go up to the patio.
Right. These irregular parcels are a big pain to deal with, and that's obviously why we're here. But I also believe in problem solving, and I also believe in, and I think we all do, listening to neighbors and trying to ensure everyone is good neighbors. And we resolved the issue, if you recall, in the pool off of Brinston. What was it, last year? I think it was last year. And I drive by that pool quite a bit. My grandma lives right in that subdivision right behind there. And there were neighbors who still weren't 100% happy, and there was a property owner who wasn't 100% happy. But we got a much better looking pool that was updated, and it does look a heck of a lot better. And so we kind of were like Solomon, we offered to split the baby, and it seemed like everybody was able to live with it in the end. I'm just trying to, instead of doing a potential rejection here of the petitioner's request, seeing if he's open to potentially looking at other options, which I think I suggested, and people seem to be commenting on something along those lines. Is there a member who would like to make a motion at this time? Or we can actually ask the petitioner to come back to the microphone and dialogue with us.
I'd like to point something out before we go to a motion with this. If I look at the picture on page 31 of our packet and the picture on page 36 of our packet, the pool is located in two different spots. The one on 36 only has one variance, and that would be to the back fence. It would be far enough away from the shed. But taking Mr. Eisenbacher's suggestion, recommendation, that could be moved closer to the patio, and then that would relieve that other infringement, in a sense, and still be in the backyard area and be able to meet the requirements, so there would be no variance. And it being a temporary pool, the petitioner is going to take it down this year, so it would be from the fact that when that happened, then next year where he placed it would be where he can look at and find that location that meets all the setbacks required for it. Just a point.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
I think I asked this question of our attorney a few meetings ago, and I think the answer was negative, but I can't remember for sure. Could we do a variance for a month and a half?
No, it has,
Runs with the land.
variances run with the land, so you can't do a temporary variance, no.
Thank you for the quick answer.
I have a question that
Wait.
follow up to that too.
I want to follow up.
Mr.
Because-
Eisenbacher has the floor.
For, yeah, I don't think this is a problem for a month, but it is a temporary pool. It's like a temporary sign in your front yard. You pick it up and move it. The hardship is he's got several thousand, or a few thousand gallons of water in there that have to be moved before you move the pool. Other than that, the problem goes away. He can move it a few inches in each direction. It may not be as level, but you can move it there and fix the problem.
Mr. McCauley.
Well, my question is, to come into compliance, what type of time frame does he have to come into compliance with that? If we were to say, take care of it.
That's a Mr. Evans question.
The ordinance doesn't prescribe a specific time frame. I don't think it would be any surprise to the applicant that leaving this meeting tonight, he may not have his variance. I think he's fully aware of that. And because it is temporary, I guess I'd want to talk to the inspector, but I think sooner than later. You know, it sounds like something that they put up on their own or perhaps help with some friends. So certainly weeks as opposed to months.
Weeks opposed to months?
Definitely,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Eisenbacher, you did not indicate you wanted to make a motion a second ago or a minute ago, but you made a comment that perhaps indicated to me that you were thinking about making a motion. I could have that wrong. So would you like to be recognized at this time?
I hate making motions to deny, but unfortunately, I understand the petitioner said that he doesn't want to regrade his whole rear yard because of the difficulty of the grade, but I have seen several houses within Troy where the circle where the pool is graded for that pool. You don't have to regrade the whole yard. I know it's a difficulty, but for next summer, please put it up the right way, and we don't need to have any discussions with this. So I'd move to reject the application.
There's a motion to reject the petitioner's application. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Lambert seconds. Any discussion? I hate to do this, but I'd like to recall the petitioner one more time because I have a question. So I think Mr. McCauley is the one who pointed out that we have several pictures of where the pool landed. Is this picture, which we have on page 36, which is not this picture?
I'll bring it up.
Is this, before you move, Mr. Evans, sir, is this where the pool
No.
was last year?
That's not the pool, that's a trampoline, and both pictures show the trampoline.
Okay.
So that is easily moved. The pool, however, I can't move it to another area without regrading because it would go against state law. It has to be above 48 inches from the top of the pool to the ground. So even if I level the area the pool's on, the ground around it has to be lowered as well. Otherwise, I don't meet the 54 inches, and then I either need a $5,000 fence or I need to regrade.
This is where the pool is now. Is that the pool?
Nope, that's the trampoline as well. The pool's not installed yet in the pictures.
That's page 36 that is in your
Okay.
packet that Mr. McCauley is referencing.
The picture showed the trampoline also.
Okay, so that's where,
That's where it's been both times,
yeah,
yes.
okay, gotcha.
I thought that was it.
Sorry, I should have clarified that in the pictures.
It's just confusing because you have this circular object, you know, that's been in a couple
To
different
me, it's
places.
obviously a trampoline, but people that don't see it.
Well, or a flying saucer, but anyway. Yeah, are there any other questions for this petitioner?
I have a question for you. When do you normally take your pool down?
Mid-September.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if you can have a seat, thank you. Any further discussion on the Eisenbacher-Lambert motion? Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote. A yes vote would be for a denial of the petitioner's request.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Koopa,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. McCauley,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
No.
The ayes have it. The petitioner's request is rejected. Sir, if you want to interface with Mr. Evans, you can call him tomorrow at the office. We don't conduct city business here other than what is on the agenda. Thank you for your time. We move on to item number C, related to 1682 Ashwood Drive. Mr. Evans, would you like to present to us on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This subject property is located in a residential area south of Square Lake and west of John R. It's outlined in yellow and circled on the overhead. There's a close-up of the property at 1682 Ashwood. Another close-up. This is the rear of the house as it sits at the time of the application. And in this drawing, we have Ashwood to the south, so the front of the house is at the bottom of this drawing. And he wants to add a covered structure to the house near the back of the property, so I've circled that. And he's provided us an illustration of the structure that he wants to add on to the rear of the house. The zoning ordinance requires that additions to the house be set back at least 40 feet from the rear property line. As proposed, this addition will be 32 feet from the rear property line. So in order to proceed, he seeks relief from the board. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any questions of city staff or inquiries that anyone would like to make? Okay, we're going to call our petitioner forward to the microphone. Please, for the record, indicate your relationship to the property in question and who you are. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nick Bookman. I'm the owner of the property. So I'd like to take the opportunity to describe what I'm planning to build, kind of build on Mr. Evans' comments, and then provide a little bit of context as to why I'm planning to build this, and then finally go through the statement of practical difficulty, because I know that's what we're all primarily concerned about. So again, the what. So what I'm trying to build, or what I'm looking to build here, is a covered awning. So it's not enclosed, it doesn't have walls, things of that nature. It is strictly an awning. You could call it a pergola or a cabana, something of that nature. It would be attached to the rear of the house, so the door wall would be right there as well. So you'd walk out and that would be the structure, or underneath the awning. Like I said, it would be open on the sides, no walls. It'd be a shingled roof, so it would match the existing roof that's on the house. The base of the supports that are there would be stone paver, so it would match a patio that's proposed to be built. Why? I love being outside. Who doesn't? Quite honestly, the way that the house is situated, the rear of the house does face south, so we do get a fair, intense sun. Solar load both from direct sun as well as the radiant from the brick on the house itself. But with that being said, there is some concern that my wife has primarily about sun exposure. Recently, her father just had skin cancer for the second time, so that's a little bit of a pronounced concern that she has, and obviously with kids and stuff of that nature too, she's obviously very conscious of that. And I do recognize that there are other routes that could be pursued that would be less expensive, more temporary in nature, that wouldn't necessarily drive a variance, right? You can get a retractable awning or something of that nature. But quite honestly, I'm looking to be here for a long time, and I want something that's going to look as good on, 10 years down the road as what it does when I put it in. So I'd rather refrain from doing a temporary type structure to provide that kind of shade. Okay, so then moving on into the statement of practical difficulty, as Mr. Evans pointed out, the lot is uniquely shaped. It is in a square traditional lot. It is on a cul-de-sac, so it is rather pie-shaped, narrow in the front, fans out very wide in the rear. So to Mr. McCulley's point previously, this addition or this structure would not be directly adjacent or facing to the other applicant that we spoke about earlier on the meeting. They are different. They are set back differently. As you can kind of, if you could, Mr. Evans, go to the overview, the site plan. Yeah, that'll work. The prior applicant, his house is obviously offset to the side, so they aren't directly back to back. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that, as well as in this picture here, you can see that there is a rather unique nature preserve, an easement that's there. It's odd in many respects because it extends both along the, I guess you would call it the back side of the property, as well as it does have that finger that kind of extends through the middle of the property as well, which is rather odd in many regards. I've looked to get that moved such that it was on the rear of the property or something of that nature, and the DEQ is less than easy to deal with in that regard. So it is unique in that nature. And then also, since it is on a cul-de-sac, the houses themselves are kind of canted or rotated apart from one another, so it's not in a direct line with the nearby houses. So as you can see, that the view of such a structure is completely obstructed by the house to my northeast, partially obstructed by the house on my west, and then the easement behind me obstructs it even further from some of the houses in the rear, as well as some of the landscaping that I'm intending to put in. So it does block their view of such a structure. And like I said, it would be an open structure with just a covered awning, and that's why I believe in part why I did get approval from the Homeowners Association. Their letter isn't much of anything except a handwritten note that says approved on my response to them with a date of 6/19. So it's not, so it has been approved by the Homeowners Association in this particular instance. Moving through the statement of practical difficulty, I'm seeking the variance because of the uniqueness of this lot, not because of uniqueness of some of my neighbors' lots. The request for variance isn't driven by personal preference. Quite honestly, the location of this awning was situated such that it minimizes the impact on the ordinance. As you can see on one of the other drawings there, it's actually a little over, it's 33 feet from the property line. I requested 32, but it's 32 feet at that corner. And then just due to the nature of the house, the orientation of the house and the lot, it gets considerably larger as you move across to the left, right? You pick up an extra couple feet there. Not necessarily getting out of the total requirements for a variance, but nonetheless, a reduction. So the characteristics that make compliance difficult weren't created by myself or the prior owner. I didn't sell off any of the property. I didn't build a pond or anything like that that would preclude building such a structure on another otherwise useful spot on the land. And then finally, the proposed structure itself is constructed of similar materials, color, style, et cetera, that befit the neighborhood. This company, this trim cut that I'm going through as my general contractor, they actually did the landscaping and pavers for both the neighbor to my left, the neighbor to my right, and one of the neighbors to my rear. So their quality of work is very similar, obviously, to the other quality of work that they've done from both materials, construction, things of that nature. I mentioned the positioning of the home and that it's set up such that it minimizes the impact on their aesthetics. The rotation of the house, with it being a cul-de-sac, pie-shaped, very narrow in the front, wide in the rear. It does minimize their view. And then the conservation easement further does obstruction of their view. As you can see, it kind of has kind of this picture here that shows how that nature preserve kind of extends in there. It really kind of nestles the awning in that kind of area as well. That's, any other questions?
Thank you. Is there a question or inquiry of this petitioner? Mr. Lambert?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you mind sharing with us the approval you have from the homeowners association? Ms. Koopa here, and then we'll look at it.
Simply a dated email that says approved, and I could send you the actual email if you're so inclined, but again, that's a one-word.
Do just fine. But this will remain in the public record.
Thank you.
Mr. Evans will receive it here tonight. Any other questions for this petitioner? Mr. Kalsunas?
When was the election took place for the new board, you know?
Sorry, what's that?
Do you have an idea when the election was taking place?
So for the prior applicant's conversation, we did have a board meeting where we initiated a new homeowners association that occurred mid-July. As far as the standing of the board, I'm unfamiliar on whether or not the builder maintains any control over the architectural committee or anything of that nature. I don't know on that. I just know that when I initiated this project and got final plans from my general contractor, I submitted them. I got an approval. I've been looking to proceed, and then, quite honestly, we were ready to get started, and as we filed for permits, the offset requirement, he was under the assumption that it was 30 feet, as it is in some of the nearby areas. And the offset being 40 feet kind of put a halt to a lot of that activity until I could come here and either get or get rejected a request for variance.
Any other member for this petitioner? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're going to open the public hearing on this matter. If you'd like to address the board, please step to the microphone at this time and identify yourself. And also your relationship to the property in question.
Yeah, I am his neighbor. My name is Srinivas. I think we already introduced myself. I have no objection. I'm absolutely fine with his addition that he's trying to do.
Thank you. If you're a member of the public, you'd like to address the board on this matter, please step to the microphone and be recognized. If you would like to address the board on this matter, please step to the microphone and be recognized. I'm going to close the public hearing out at this time and ask Mr. Lambert to share with us any communications that we had.
Mr. Chairman, as far as I'm aware of, there are no communications in our packet on this matter from residents or nearby neighbors.
Thank you very much. So now we bring the matter back to the board table for possible action, inquiry of staff. So remember, we'd like to be recognized. Mr. Lambert.
I think in this situation, there's clearly a hardship because of the unusual shape of the property. I do feel somewhat bad for the previous applicant under item A because he kind of must have submitted his application under a previous regime, so we have to postpone his action on his for another month. But I do believe that the applicant has demonstrated, number one, that there is a hardship with the unusual configuration of the property, and that we have approval from the homeowners association. So what I'd like to do at this point is make a motion to approve the variance request.
Motion for approval.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Desmond. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Kalsunas.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Motion carries. Congratulations, you have your variance. Have a very good night. So we move on to our final variance request related to 4222 Rouge Circle Drive. Mr. Evans, can you please present to us on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And this neighborhood is a single-family residential neighborhood north of Waddles and west of Adams. As in the previous presentations, the property is outlined in yellow here in the upper right hand of the slide. Here's a closer-up view of the subject property at 4222 Rouge Circle, and even closer. Now, this was provided by the applicant to illustrate that what they want to do is put a garage here to the along the northwest portion of the property. And I backed out a little bit with an aerial just to show that relative to the property lines. Now, this illustration provided by the applicant, even with wording sideways, we still have the same perspective. The proposed garage is in this area here to the upper right, and this is the existing house. But this illustration really does a good job of demonstrating what the ordinance says. And this hatched area here actually qualifies as defined as side yard. Well, the zoning ordinance doesn't allow detached buildings except in the rear yard. So in order to, if the applicant wanted to comply with the code, they'd have to push this building back east of this, basically further back eastward than the most eastward edge of the house. So he is seeking a variance in order to allow the detached garage to be built in the side yard where it is required to be located in the rear yard. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there a member who would like to inquire of our city administration on this matter? Seeing that there isn't, we are going to call the petitioner forward. You can step to the microphone and identify yourself and let us know your relationship to the property in question.
Yes, I'm Richard Waters. My wife, Susan Waters, there. We're the owners. And I actually have an expanded version of the practical difficulty. That picture doesn't really show what our lot looks like. We have a wetlands and we have the Rouge River behind. It doesn't really show that. We've been residents of the city of Troy for 40 years. Over 45 years, in that house for 40 years. In fact, 40 years as of a couple days ago. And that, to the right in that picture, it doesn't really show, but the Rouge River flows down through there. There's a utility power line right to the right of that oval. And we have a FEMA flood plan, the DEA wetlands. We've got anyways, that's all in my statement of practical difficulty that I've enhanced since the one I submitted, and I have copies for everybody if that's appropriate to hand out.
Hand it to Ms. Koopa and she'll grab one and pass it along.
So I'll go through the statement of practical difficulty. The exceptional characteristics of the property for which the variance is sought make compliance with dimensional requirements substantially more difficult. And I maintain that in our lot, you see it pretty clearly there, that there's really only one place that we could put a garage and avoid the utility lines, I'll say, we have a 12-foot wide utility easement behind our house, which really doesn't show up there, but it's immediately to the left of the floodplain, and it runs side by side. And then we have the FEMA floodplain, and those are, okay.
They've got all your pages in their packet.
Okay.
I just used select pages in the presentation.
Okay.
So they do have all that at their desktop.
Okay. So I'll describe the FEMA floodplain behind the easement, but in addition, we have the Rouge River, which meanders through the lot. There's a small pond that we share with our neighbor and an island, and obviously we can't build there. And then I found out with DEQ online, wetlands map viewer, that most of our backyard's actually a wetlands. So obviously we can't build there. So we maintain the proposed garage location would be outside of the wetlands in that oval. And then in addition, there's a fairly steep slope going down to the Rouge River starting at approximately where that oval is. And that sloping ground starts at about the backside of the utility easement and continues approximately 10 foot down to the river and the pond. So that's that much change in elevation. Our lot is irregular in shape, goes from 150 feet in the front to 111 feet in the back, and that angle in the lot line further limits where a garage could be constructed. And then, in addition, we have an existing driveway. You can see to the left of the oval, which is where we put a RV, perfectly aligned, almost perfectly aligns with the planned garage. And so putting the garage anywhere else would be kind of impractical. And additionally, we have a dozen or so mature oak trees in the backyard. And one of them, which we've had estimated as being over 200 years old, several are 100 years old, and we certainly don't want to disturb them. So that pretty well covers, I think, the exceptional characteristics of the property that would make it difficult, even though we do have a big yard with approximately 1.3 acres. So item B, the characteristics to make compliance with dimensional requirements difficult must be related to the premises for which the variance is sought, not some other location, which is, and this it's being sought for that location. Characteristics to make compliance with the dimensional requirements shall not be of a personal nature. They're not. We or the previous owners did not create the FEMA floodplain, the utility easement, the slope to the river, or the narrowing of the lot, and the area that EQ defines as wetlands, or the planting of those oak trees. So the proposed variance will not be harmful or alter the essential character of the area in which the property is located, etc. And we maintain nothing detrimental will be caused by the building of the proposed garage in the spirit of the standard E as defined above. And then I know you can't consider anything other than the practical difficulties, but I wanted to make it that our garage in the side yard would look like all the other garages in the backyards. And I know that's nothing that you can say anything about. But to make sure that our neighbors have no objection, I went door to door and went to every house on our street on Juniper Court, Pine Hill. I went to Bronson Drive. We contacted all the people in there, talked to 40 people, and reviewed our plans, and nobody objected to anything. And I have a petition here with additional names from the one that was in the packet, and I can submit that. So some of the highlighted houses aren't really that close to us, but people wanted to sign anyway, so I said, well, sure, I'll take your signature. There was two homes that did say, during our conversations with two of our nearby neighbors that share the park-like backyard that we all enjoy, get us like a park back there, it was mentioned that they hoped that we would not build anything that would be impacting their view of the backyard, because it's like a valley. You can look down there and it's, like a woods. Of course, we have all the deer now. Never had those before. And we assured them if we got our variance, our proposed garage would not be seen from their backyards. And it wouldn't be if it was in that area. And we can't put it anywhere else. So I hope to have your approval to get a variance. And
is that a single car garage? I'm looking at the rendering.
It's a large garage. The purpose of it really is to put our motorhome in it.
Is there anyone for the petitioner? Mr. McCauley.
I'm looking at your rendering. My question is, and this isn't relevant in a sense to your application is well done. Is the material that you'd be making that garage out of, is it going to be matching the home, or is it going to be like the rendering that you have here?
It'd be matching the home as far as the front.
Okay. So it'll be brick?
Well, simulated brick on the bottom.
Okay.
I just made that on Home Designer Pro. I couldn't figure out how to.
Thank you.
Ms. Koopa.
I just want to commend you for getting signatures from everyone. I just think that was fantastic.
It was a challenge because
I know.
You ring a doorbell and you can see people in there and they're going, that's another salesman, because I have.
I know the experience.
Yes. Anyone else for the petitioner? Okay, if you could have a seat, please. Thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing on this matter. If you'd like to address the board on item 5D, please come to the microphone and identify yourself and let us know how you're related to the property in question.
Gentlemen and Ms. Koopa, I'm Daryl Yadich. I'm the neighbor directly to the north. I would probably be the one most impacted with the building of the garage, and I have no objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to address the board on this matter. Please step to the microphone. Identify yourself.
Good evening. My name's Graham Field. I live just to the west, right across the street, kitty corner, 2725. So I would see the garage all the time. I've been there 15 years. Mr. Waters is, he's not a recluse, but he keeps to himself. In the matter of him getting 40 signatures, I've seen him more other than on his daily walks. So I agree with the commending him for that. I remodel homes for a living, and when he showed me his plans, where he was going to do it, and his concern for impacting his neighbors, I don't see any issues with the style, the height, where he's putting it that would impact our neighborhood in any negative way, so I'm for it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to address the board. Please step to the microphone and be recognized. If you'd like to address the board on this matter, 5D, please step to the microphone and you'll be recognized. Close out the public hearing on that matter. Mr. Lambert, could you please report about communications on this issue?
I believe the only communication we have was the petition that the applicant has included in our kit, and it looked like there were about 38 signatures on the petition supporting the variance.
Thank you very much.
And I think he has more that he brought with us, so.
If you want anything else to be added to the public record, just please deposit it over here, and then it will be added in. Thank you. Is there a member of the board who would like to be recognized? Mr. Eisenbacher.
Out of all the items we've had come before us, this one tells me why we even exist as a board for giving variances from the literal interpretation. It meets everything. It's a funny shape. It's got environmental concerns. The side yard isn't really a side yard when you look at the layout, but in the technical terms it is. So it's completely relevant for us to give a variance on it. No impact in neighborhood. I mean, it's an easy one. I wish they were all this easy.
And this package is great too.
Yes, and the documentation is wonderful. If we could make decisions this easy, I think the job would be a lot better. So with that, if there's no objections from my colleagues, I'd move to approve.
A second.
Motion and seconded to approve the petitioner's request for a variance related to 5D. Is there any discussion on the matter? Seeing that there isn't, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Congratulations, you have your variance. Motion passes. We move on to item number 6. And Mr. Evans, do we have any communications?
I do not.
Okay. Item number 7, miscellaneous business. Do we have any miscellaneous business?
We do not.
Seeing that we don't, is there any information that the board would like to request to city staff before we conclude tonight's meeting? Just before 9 o'clock. We'll move on to item number 8.
I have something.
Oh, yes.
I have requested that our minutes be included in the Planning Commission packet because I think they need to see the breadth and depth of discussion that we have. And I actually asked them to watch the last few minutes of our last special meeting as Mr. Eisenbacher requested. And I also want to say that while it's, our board is here to not grant variances willy-nilly, this last one was just so easy to grant because it just was obvious. It was one of the rare occasions where I haven't had to struggle with a decision. And then my last comment would be, Mr. Evans, when we have people come forward with requests on postage size lots, and we have ordinances, how do we explain to them that when they buy the property, is it something that the builder should be explaining to them? Because this isn't the first time that we've had someone come forward with a variance request on a small lot, and it makes it very difficult when the hardship is that the size of the lot they purchased was small, and it's not really a hardship. Somebody else came before us like that as well a couple of meetings ago. How do we go about explaining to people the difference between that corner size lot in that same subdivision, why we were able to grant it, and why just on smaller lots? Is it something the builder can do? What can we do as a community to help people understand that they can't buy a really small lot and then expect that we're just going to grant variances?
Well, that this is a small lot, or perhaps in our previous case tonight that someone kind of maxed out the available building area. Well, that's actually a choice of the home builder and anyone who's added on, as well as someone who's going to buy the house. I mean, they could always check with our department before buying a house or put it in a purchase agreement, or ask the builder. But ultimately, it's going to be incumbent on what private activity is occurring out there and whether or not somebody wants to ask about that. I would say the majority of people in Troy don't ask for variances, so it's hard to predict who might need a variance and who might not. I can say that while I verbally require everyone to discuss with me my opinion and explain to them what the practical difficulty standards are and want them to fully understand it, not everybody consults me before turning in a variance application. So that can be a challenge, because we could publicize time and time again, these are the requirements for an area, but is it fair for us to say, hey, if you max out? So I'm not sure there's a one answer fits all.
So basically, we're saying that when someone buys a home in Troy and they buy their lot, they need to be a very informed consumer so that they know what the variances, what the ordinance limits are on what they can build.
That is a fair statement. I will say anecdotally, when I was working for another community, they built an entire subdivision and maxed out the lots, and they designed the homes to accommodate uncovered decks on the first floor, yet there was nothing in the code that would allow those decks to go on. So we had about 50 homes that actually we did an ordinance amendment. So these things just happen. So I think what you said about the educated consumer is really, you got to educate yourself. What do you want to get out of this?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Eisbacher.
Sort of tied into that would be, when the developers are building the houses, the more they put the house as close as possible to their front line, gives them the most amount of space in the back. So, I mean, as we're going through an approval process of new home sites, the Planning Commission and our staff could have, I mean, as much as possible, practical, tell them, scoot it all the way forward so that a future owner can put something in the back.
I think that they do that. I mean, usually when a developer comes in to do a development, they will walk into the planning department and say, what's the biggest house I can put here? Because they know that's going to be their maximum return. So, I mean, the builders, that's what they're thinking. And now, especially that the consumers absorb the fact that you can buy a $500,000 house, that you can touch your neighbor, and they're comfortable with that. It's like, that's not something that's going to go away. So, I mean, that is something within real estate. When we sell houses to people, we do let them know, especially in these new developments, that they're probably not going to be able to modify them. Now, it's not like a mandated thing or a standard thing, but I know we tell everybody that, you know, most likely this is maxed out, and don't purchase it under the assumptions that you're going to be able to do some dramatic expansion to it. At least we're in these new style developments. But I mean, it really is it's on the buyer at the end of the day. So even if we tell people as real estate agents, like, they still don't necessarily either fully embrace what you're telling them up front, or they just assume, oh, we'll figure it out later. Then later shows up, and this is later, and yeah, so it's a difficult thing to solve up front. That's it.
Anyone else? Okay. Okay, we will close out miscellaneous business and move on to public comment. If you are here to address the board on any matter, please proceed to the microphone and identify yourself, and you will be recognized. If you're here for any other, if you'd like to address the board on any matter, please go to the microphone and be recognized. I'll close this portion out, seeing that there isn't anyone here. And we are adjourned until September.